an effective story creates that empathy with the audience and the listener to the content and the characters in the story, which makes them feel connected to it and own it. Which is why it goes viral.
Hello and welcome to Sparks, a series by Interactive Workshops. Here we spark anything in work and life, from how to spark projects, to how to spark culture, to how to spark a strong head of hair, a quiff, good use of a blow dryer and a bit of hair gel. Welcome to the show, Andy McConkey.
Appreciate that introduction. Thank you. Very pointed.
You guys have been to
I
this.
just thought we could appreciate for a moment what it is to have a
mutual
strong
quiff
head of hair.
appreciation is always appreciated.
You inspire me.
Well, look at that. It's almost identical, guys. Get a room.
And welcome, Jonna, as well. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Chris. How am I? I'm really well, thank you. Thanks for asking.
Doing my job for me.
I'm so excited to be here and also
Good.
to have my lifelong actually, friend and business partner, Andy McConkey, Director, Interactive Workshops, one of the world's foremost facilitators of all kinds of workshops and trainings, an expert in story. He's run, for example, Red Bull's Global Story Academy all over the world and worked with leaders in very important organizations, helping them think through stories that they're going to tell. And he's absolutely brilliant. He's here.
He is. I agree. Andy McConkey, welcome.
I haven't got another word to add. But it feels good to be here.
It's great to be here. Have you been enjoying our podcast?
Massively, yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Now you're in it.
What was your favourite episode so far that we've done?
The first one.
Was it? What did you like about that?
Just the interaction and wordplay.
Yeah, you like the joking around, did you?
I thought the dynamic created by the two of you was an excellent platform.
Yeah. Did you see our last one, by the way?
No.
That was on lying.
No.
It was on lying and how to uncover lies.
Yeah, so you might be able to use that.
I mean, have you watched any of our podcasts?
No.
And are you ever going to watch this podcast?
No.
No.
This tells you a bit about Andy's personality, maybe.
Yeah, but he's got busy. He's got things to do.
Very busy guy.
It's not through lack of desire, I would like to claim, but it's on my to-do list. I haven't quite got there yet.
Yeah, but also knowing you as well as I do, I know that even if you're in a film, you wouldn't even go to the cinema to watch your own film. So you're probably not even going to watch this back.
No, I genuinely, not that I ever would be, but if I were an actual film actor, I genuinely wouldn't watch the films I was in.
No.
Wow.
So you won't show your kids this little YouTube and you won't tell your wife?
No.
Here for the moment, and then it's dead to you.
I like to be fully present doing exactly what I'm doing while I'm doing it, but I don't give it a massive amount of thought before or after, I'll be perfectly honest.
Yeah, and
There we
Chris,
go.
this means it's quite special. This is like a one-off.
Yeah.
He'll never see this again.
Yeah. This is it.
We better enjoy
All
the
right.
moment.
Well, we're going to talk about how to spark story, how to spark our storytelling. We're going to draw on some of the wisdom of Andy McConkey, co-founder and director at Interactive Workshops.
I'll pick up those job titles.
Yeah. I thought people might like to know.
Yeah.
I'll add producer to that as well.
Producer as well. Producer
incredible.
of the magic, producer of the sparks, producer of the stories.
Producer of incredible stuff.
Yeah. So we're going to get into that. But firstly, Andy, how are you? Tell us about what you've been doing lately.
I'm very well, Chris. Thanks for asking. Lately, I have been bringing up 2 small kids, which keeps me very busy. I've been running some teams here at Interactive Workshops, which keeps me very busy. And I've also been running some great workshops with clients recently in the space of leadership and talent development and progression of people's careers and their own stepping out into wider roles. So actually, on theme, the topic of storytelling has been coming up in some of the workshops I've been running over the last couple of weeks quite prominently.
And give us a couple of career highlights. I mean, is it a place you've been or a brand you've worked with or?
Tough question. Career highlights, I think if I'm looking back some time ago, I remember one particular session we were running with a client who are well known in the energy drink industry. And they were running some sessions over in Tokyo. And it just was a particular group of participants that came together. It was a big group, it's about 30 people. It was a particular group of facilitators, both external and internal from their side, and it just came together and created a real sort of pinnacle experience for all people involved. And there was also some very, very good entertainment in the karaoke bars of Tokyo. That was enjoyable.
I think I've seen some videos of that, actually.
And they should never see the light of day. They should never see the light of day. And then more recently, I've actually really enjoyed the recent round of hiring, actually, I would have as a pinnacle moment.
highlight.
Yeah, a real highlight. So bringing on some young, fresh talent into our teams and into the organization, and just seeing how they're adding into the culture and adding into the teams, that's been a real highlight for me.
I love
It's
hiring.
been good to see. Yeah,
I
it's
love
really
hiring.
exciting. And part of the story, maybe, that we're telling for the organisation.
It definitely forms part of the narrative of any organization is, are we in growth? Are we in decline? Are we getting young talent? Are we hiring experience? Are we going into different... It's all the tapestry that creates the story, whether on purpose or by accident. That's the narrative that you're currently living.
And the narrative we're living is that we're in a podcast studio in West London with Andy McConkey, and we've got a few short hours to get into the power of story. So, I mean, story can mean many things. I thought we'd have a quick quiz, different words for stories. I'd start tale,
Fable.
An anecdote,
biography.
A riddle.
history,
I'm just scrolling through my Netflix and Sky subscription, and I'm
Thriller,
now realising
adventure. Yeah.
drama, romance, comedy,
thriller, suspense,
Sports.
foreign.
Yeah.
True.
Actually, is it foreign? Non-English.
Probably a technical
European.
word for it. Anyway,
I think
Artistic.
they go by different
I'm
geographies.
so
Lots
sorry,
of different
can't-
things.
Can't say foreign, can I? It sounds. I feel like I'm now creating a migrant small boat
Yeah,
situation.
did you vote for Brexit?
I don't mean foreign. I mean international. That's what it's called.
international.
What is international if it's not the difference between national and international? It's foreign. Yeah. So I must be right on that.
So lots of different words for story. So lots of different words for story. What do we really mean by storytelling in a professional context?
Can I answer this? All the world's a stage and we are merely players.
Everybody's the main character in their own film, in their own story. There's that whole narrative that goes around. I think in this space of storytelling, stories in general, sparking stories, there isn't an exact answer to that question, I don't think, because a story to one person could be not a particularly good story to somebody else. And so you're saying, well, is it a story or is it a good story? That's distinction number one. Is it a story or is it an effective story for business use? That's distinction number
So
two.
an effective business story. What's an effective business story?
Yeah, well, because ultimately a story could be a narrative about anything, right? It's describing something real that happened, or it could be fictional. So there's no limit. There's no kind of outer limit of what a story is or is not by definition of it. It's describing a series of events, a series of characters, some stuff that happened, either real or imagined. So like story could literally be anything. But in the space of it being in the business context, there's got to be a purpose for why you're telling the story, right? Because otherwise, you are in the field of just anecdote telling.
Fiction or anecdote.
Well,
yeah.
if you're just around the coffee machine and the classically funny person in the team is saying the funny thing that they did at the weekend, it's a story, but ultimately it's just an anecdote about some things that happen normally for the sake of humor, but there's no real wider impact other than getting a bunch of people to go, ah, ha, 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 ha.
Yeah, so you're talking, it's actually quite common in a pub environment that the storytelling that's going on is ego-driven.
Yeah.
I did this. Oh, I did this a bit more than that.
Yeah, it often works like that, doesn't it? You're trying to beat the last story. Oh, no, I can go one better.
So there's a kind of social storytelling but I do think that serves a big purpose. We're connecting with each other and we're trying to work out who's the top dog and who's the funniest or who's the cleverest. And it doesn't have to be a pub. It can be in an online forum that maybe those tales. Oh, I knew the stats better. And you don't know the stats. So they have this kind of social element. But you're maybe referencing more from a leadership or from a directive purpose or an intentional purpose.
Yeah, and I actually think intentional's a very good word. Well done.
Thank you.
Because
actually made that
it
up
happens occasionally. Because otherwise, as I say, you're in that space of just saying the funny thing or the interesting thing or the fact-based thing to show how much information you have or the expertise-based thing to show how brilliant you are just for its own sake. But in the space of leadership in business or, stories are often used in creating a vision for a team or a business or a strategy or in the space of a change that's happening to a business or any of these sorts of things. And you're telling the story for a specific purpose. Now, is that purpose to galvanize people together? Is that purpose to create a desire to want something that currently doesn't exist, or a level of performance that they haven't hit before? Or is it, whatever the reason behind it is, the purpose to tell the story is to get a response from people that is more than just, that was interesting. You're actually looking for behavior change, or a new set of knowledge, or an acceptance of something that wasn't there before, or an opening of the mind to opportunities that they weren't previously open to. There's a change that happens because of the story you told. And that's very intentional. And that, to me anyway, is the difference between how you can utilize the vehicle of story in the space of business or life, not just business.
I'd say also life.
But for more than just, I'm telling you this for the sake of itself, which ultimately is what so many people are or just for the sake of myself, if I were to say that. So not necessarily just for the story itself, but just for me, which is where one-upmanship comes from. Where
I love one-upmanship.
no, you don't love it as much as me. I'll tell you why I love one-upmanship.
Let me just share what Andy said to summarize it just a bit better than he said it.
Yeah, go on.
I'm not sure I can.
But this is where because I think if you were to put horrible bunny ears on storytelling, I think people will often feel the pressure of, I'm not a storyteller, or I'm not that person who has people in the palm of their hand around in the pub, around the table. I'm not the person that can just hold people in interest. And that's not storytelling for a purpose. That's being a natural, charismatic, gregarious anecdote teller, which some people are and some people aren't. But in the space of telling a story for an intentional purpose, anyone can do it.
So that's a skill we can learn as opposed to something we're gifted in.
So are you a storyteller or not? We are all storytellers by nature, and I could go into the science behind it and the evolution behind it, but you may not find it interesting. But we're all storytellers by nature because we're human beings. It's in our DNA. But we're not all necessarily gregarious storytellers.
No.
But we can all be really effective ones.
You raise a really important point, which is before we had books, before we had films,
the internet,
before we had any way of retaining knowledge, we could use story.
Had to use story in a way.
Use story. But story, when I first started working specifically on storytelling, I was intrigued by the fact that story can spread like a virus. So if I were to have a PowerPoint presentation and show you some facts, let's say to 20 people, it's very unlikely that any of those 20 people are going to get hold of that PowerPoint presentation and then represent it to another 20 people each, yeah? But if I tell a really good story, it's very likely that those individuals will share that story with others. But the story itself can go on without the source of the story even being known or remembered and turn into a tale. And this is very much how it happens in organizations as well. How we build a culture, it's full of stories about what will and won't work, what did and didn't work. I think I mentioned before, I've worked in organizations where they said, oh, we know salespeople who didn't hit their targets and got fired the next day. It's like, that's great. You can tell yourself that story. Let me go and find some people who didn't hit their sales target and didn't get fired the next day. And then we can say, in this organization, occasionally missing your sales target doesn't get you fired. Whereas they've got it coded. They've got this story. Last time there was a recession, we X, Y, Z. We had one of our clients, last time there was a recession, we let go of lots of people. And then in 3 years' time, we had a really big problem with our middle management. We didn't have enough people. So this time we're going through a recession. We're not going to do that. So these stories, they transmit and they even morph and float around. And they're very, very powerful in our conscience because of that human wiring to latch the emotion and the story together and weave it together.
Well, and it's that human wiring because it's ultimately empathy that's hardwired into every human being, and that is what we feel with characters in a story. And so you hear an effective story, an interesting one, a funny one, an effective one, a scary one, whatever it happens to be. There are characters in that story, some of them human, some not necessarily people. A mountaineer is climbing the mountain. The mountain is a character in that story, right? Yeah. So you've got characters in the story.
Evil mountain.
Exactly.
The villain.
With the cold weather and the wind.
Can it be conquered?
Can it? Will it give
Good
up
versus
its
evil?
Will it give up its secrets?
Yeah.
Yes, normally, yes.
Yeah.
And the thing with the characters in the story is that fires up the empathetic feeling of the audience, whoever the audience is. They go, I feel empathy for that character. I know how that feels. Oh gosh, I can imagine myself in that situation. All of those type of automatic thoughts go on. And so that then fires a connection with the story, whereas you do your PowerPoint presentation, it's not really a connection.
You do yours. The connection with mine.
Yeah. And so
What are you trying to put onto me here?
what?
You're saying my PowerPoint presentations there's no empathy there.
Yeah, I've seen them.
You should see the way I tell it.
Yeah,
Speak for yourself, buddy.
I think maybe you're adding story to your presentations.
But this is the point, that actually, if you did have a PowerPoint presentation, brilliant, and you tell an effective story connected with that, not strangely, there's neuroscience behind it, but the two would actually be connected in the memory and experience of the audience. And so actually, you would be encoding the experience of the PowerPoint presentation more effectively with the story, which is why all good presenters tell stories while they're presenting, which is why all good and effective leaders who might have a couple of slides don't just narrate the slides.
Yeah. And someone might go away saying it was a great presentation, but actually it was that they told great stories.
Yeah, you're talking about I was connected with that thing, which again comes back to an effective story creates that empathy with the audience and the listener to the content and the characters in the story, which makes them feel connected to it and own it. So which is why it goes viral. Which is why somebody else,
I would love to go viral
because
Chris.
they would feel the ownership of the story, not just connected to the original teller.
We've got, do you know, we got 178 views of our last.
Oh, well, that's a very small virus, but it's viral nonetheless.
But the point is, like an artist, we're at work, and this podcast may just hang on the wall of our own home, but you never ever know. I just want to build on one of those things. The other thing we talk about storytelling is it's very individualistic in some ways. So telling a story, and we've talked a lot about the listener, but there's actually the listeners. There's the audience. There's the team that we're sewing that story into. And one of my big parts leading this organisation is to try and make sure there's a collective understanding of the story and a collective consciousness. There's also, you can use stories for why we do things around here, the way we do things around here. You can use story to therefore reinforce other important policies, for example, or cultural messages, or the way we handle difficulties. So there are, and you'll both have seen me do a ton of this, but there's the apocryphal story at interactive workshops that when Alex joined, he was just head of plants, and all he had to do was keep the plants alive. And we told him that if they died, he'd get fired. I mean, it's a good setup, and it was a good joke at the time, and it was true. But
I mean, not entirely true in that he had other responsibilities, but it was a genuine role for him.
It's a story, though, isn't it? If
It's
it's the facts, we'd say all the other bits. But the storyline is when Alex started here, his one job was make sure the plants didn't die. He took responsibility for that, and now look at him. And I think that those things sit in a group of people's consciences. Oh, crap.
Consciousness
Those things sit in a group of people's
consciousness.
Consciousnesses.
Consciousness eye?
They sit in the conscience
of the cognoscienti. It sits in people's consciousness.
We don't want to get in trouble with the conscientiati.
Is that the Italian secret police?
It sits in the consigliati.
Isn't that the consigliere?
Constabulary.
Yeah, I see.
It sits in our collective consciousness. And for me, I'm a lazy leader. So when I've got the stories running, I don't have to do any work. If I haven't got the stories running
for you, without you being there.
That's it.
Yeah.
If I were to just, take a leap from that and one up it.
Two up it.
No, but
we'll assess, is it a one up or double?
No, there's an interesting point that I also hear from that.
You say it and we'll work out. That's interesting, yeah?
So Alex, young grad, joins, right? He gets given head of plants, along with the message that if they die, you're out. Again, it's humorous, it's tongue-in-cheek, it's of the style, it's of the narrative, it's of the culture.
Yeah.
But that same story can be used in multiple different ways. So with a client, for example, we could say, we love to give our team responsibility before their experience. So I'll tell you the time that a grad joined, and on his first day, he was made the head of something. It was the head of plants. But he's feeling responsibility.
Are you going to tell them he was head of plants or just head of something?
No, you say head of plants. It doesn't matter, because the point is that actually you're saying we wanted in his situation, you can't make him head of HR. It's not fair on him. It wouldn't be fair on the company. But we officially made him head of plant, so he felt responsibility for something from day one.
Yeah.
And so that then can speak to the culture of we like to give our people responsibility all over the organization. You can then say, actually, 2 out of the 3 plants died, but we didn't put him on disciplinary.
No, but they didn't die.
2 out of the 3 did, I think, from memory. But
Not when he was responsible. That was after. As soon as he left that
They all
job,
died.
I think the plants knew.
Yeah, they did. They did.
I think they loved him. And I feel that the grieving process when he was no longer head of plants, they just Harry Kiri.
Yeah, we can call him the plant whisperer. But
But there's other narratives. There's points you could make from the story.
And again, this is something I come across with so many people when I speak about the topic of storytelling is they will say, oh, I don't have stories, or how could I have a story for every situation? You don't need one for every situation. You can have the same story or situation or narrative that can land multiple points with different audiences for different purposes for the same thing.
Yeah, we cover this a little bit actually with dad jokes in the excellent episode that we did on humour, and you really enjoyed it. But we realised that the thing about makes a dad joke is not that it's bad, but it's that the kids have heard it so many times before. But I think it's similar with stories, isn't it? A good leader may have 5, 6, 10 stories, and then they tell them with different purposes, and they can do character switches, or they can do plot twists or different narratives. They use those well-crafted stories or the building blocks from them for a variety of different situations. It's almost like, there's toolboxes. Did you ever have a toolbox with the pull-out sides?
It's got all the bits on each side.
There's not that many tools, but a skilled craftsperson knows how to get most jobs done with just those stories.
And a skilled craftsperson knows that for the job I'm doing at the moment, I only need to open this half. I don't even need to tell that part of the story.
Yeah.
I only need to open this half of the toolbox this time because those are the bits I need.
Yeah.
And so actually that's the skill of storytelling. It's not about being the natural, most charismatic, loudest, funniest thing. It's going, what do I need this to act? What job am I needing this to do for me now? Great. I'll do that.
So we talked a little bit about the kind of company narrative that we might be building. What happens if we don't have that or don't get that? We lose sight of that overall narrative.
I think it's a bit like, if you've got a family member or someone has a blackout and there's a discontinuity. I was actually flying once to America with a colleague and they collapsed on the plane. Literally, they got up from their seat, were going to the toilet and they collapsed. And when they came to, they didn't know where they were. So they were on a plane, they're going to America, they didn't know where they were. But they'd lost the narrative for a second.
Scary.
Yeah, really scary.
Yeah.
But I think that's what happens in organizations with stories. If we can't quite keep the narrative, then we're not really sure why we're there, where we came from, where the company came from, where it's going, and where we fit in the whole thing. So when we
quite a dark place to be, actually. Yeah.
So that's why I see. Part of my job as the CEO here is to try to keep the narrative alive. And you have to keep that narrative not just alive from A to B, but taking into account the entire history of the organization and where it's going. It's actually similar for brands. They need to have an origin story and be able to share the story of their brand. When we did our marketing podcast, it was really, really good.
I remember it well.
All the way through, you've got to be able to, if your brand has a discontinuity and there's 16 years where it died, you've got to be able to bring that back to life and say, it happened with car brands, actually, they park them and bring them back out. Maserati is continuous, but Maybach had a pause. You've got to be able to dig back into the origin story. So for teams and individuals, if your team loses the narrative, the thread of exactly what's happening, where we're going, I think it's really hard. And it's hard for them to come to work if they're not sure, why are we doing this again? What am I here for?
Well, I think it's because in that situation, it actually takes the story out of it. You then become
just a worker.
Very, very transactional.
Yeah.
You become, I have no story here. I turn up, I seem to do some work that I don't really understand why. I get a paycheck. It serves a purpose. But if you have a story, then you feel that you're involved in shaping something because by definition, a good story should have peaks and troughs. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
You cannot have.
I love that.
You cannot have an effective story that is just domination or a positive message, or you shouldn't because it's not actually effective.
It would be a very dull mountain movie where the lead character just relentlessly makes progress.
Makes steady progress.
Oh, that was good. That was good.
Without any injuries, curveballs,
no setbacks,
landslides.
Yeah.
And again, only because some people may not be aware, but when I was younger, I grew up in Nepal, so I actually have a slight interest in mountain climbing.
Is that anywhere near Nepal?
It's exactly the same place, correctly pronounced. And the thing is that you never hear the stories of the Sherpas doing the climb.
It's an appalling story.
Because actually, I think the record is that guy, he's done the summit of Everest 29 times last year.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, it was just a Tuesday for him. It's not a story. Whereas you get the out of shape, rich hiker who bought the license and shouldn't really be up there, and it was terrible and it was dangerous and something happened. That's then a story because there's jeopardy, there's ups and downs. The guy that did it 27 times in the last 6 months, it's not really a
I'd
story.
say Sherpa Tenzing Nordgay doesn't get the respect that he deserves for getting to the summit with Sir Edmund Hillary.
Still the jury is out on who got there first, but most people.
But Sherpa Tenzing Nordgay, one of my favourite Sherpas.
Now we know.
The original.
He's the OG.
He's the original famous Sherpa.
Yeah, actually, but you're right. But whose perspective we're telling a story from is also vital. Coming back to one of our favourite topics, the ability to step into other people's shoes. I believe that the best storytellers, when they're telling the story, they're actually in the shoes of the other, like sensing how this is being perceived and able to use their empathy skills to adjust or adapt. For example, if you're in a presentation or if you're in a town hall and you're trying to tell the story of where we're going or what's happening next, do you get an internal trigger when you realise this isn't actually making sense to a lot of people? I may need to stop there and ask if there are any questions. Or do you kind of plough on without regard for the audience? You know?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, in that space of storytelling good practice, you speak to content creators, you speak to filmmakers, you speak to all of these things. That's why they run the audience forums before they release anything, because you've got to think audience first. You've got to start with who am I telling this story to and for what purpose? And therefore, which bit of the narrative do I emphasize and maximize, and which bits, honestly, was it just there for me? I was telling that bit of it because it was interesting to me and it was really important that I got the detail in there, or I talked about next quarter's numbers or what we were looking to hit for that number. It matters to you as the CEO or a leader or something because the number is really important to you. The people you're speaking to care about their every day. And so actually, if you're telling this message up here because you think it's the really important one, but the audience is going, I could care about what the EBITDA is, thanks very much. You're not telling the story for the effective purpose because it's for you, not the audience.
Yeah.
So our stories are trying to generate that response. We've got to think about the audience in order to do that, to get that reaction.
Yeah.
What then can we do to improve in our storytelling? Because it sounds really powerful.
Well, I think this is my greatest realisation that I ever had on this topic, which I shared with a very good friend and colleague of ours who's been on the pod, Emily Link. What I realised is the life that we're living, every single day, is an opportunity to harvest a story that we can use later on. However, if we don't think like that, and if we're not paying attention, then we won't harvest the stories. And then when we need them, they're not there. So I think that the first thing we can do is open our eyes, open them wider, much wider. I walked down Chiswick High Road this morning, and guess what I saw on the way here? Have a quick guess, guys.
A bus.
An animal of some kind.
It wasn't an animal.
A famous person.
It was a person, but they weren't famous.
Was it your colleague?
It wasn't a colleague.
An old friend.
It wasn't an old friend.
This could be a very long game.
Yeah. There was
Tell us.
some people sleeping on the streets.
Oh, okay.
And they were asleep at 8 o'clock in the morning with a piece of cardboard over their face, lying in a doorway. And it made me want to do something to help. But it also, I could easily block that out and just be on my way to work. But as I walked along, I was provoked to think about what I'm doing in life, because there's people out there that need our help. And I could be busy with my work, and I could do all that if I haven't made a difference to the people in my community. It's not because they weren't sleeping on the streets generic. They're in my community where I live.
On your walk.
On my walk,
yeah.
What am I going to do to help not just people in general in that situation, but those people that live where I live? So if we haven't got our eyes open, we can't harness story. Now, I could use that story if we went into a town hall or what's the purpose of our company? What's the purpose of your company? Is your company purpose to help society and do good? Is it here to make a difference? Specifically, where, when, how? But many people are on a somehow blinkered autopilot, and they're missing out all the threads of life that they could bring to their corporate and commercial storytelling.
Absolutely. And that small example is exactly how you can bring people along on the narrative of something more effectively as an individual or a leader within a particular business context, but if we come back to it again, a life context as well. Rather than saying at the town hall or the team Monday meeting or whatever it happened to be, let's remember, people, our company is here to do more than just X or Y, more than just we're here to do good, we're here to make an impact. More powerfully than that, you tell them why you're telling them what you're about to tell them because of the story. You say, I was reminded. I was reminded by this experience. Walking through, having my lovely coffee, and I was walking up the high road, and there was this juxtaposition of the wealth of Chiswick and what I saw, this man or woman, lying in the doorway under the cardboard, which isn't what I've seen in that space before. And it reminded me why. And so that story, the prompting for it, and the kind of almost personal slight vulnerability that a leader could show by saying, it made me question, it reminded me, that's the in to the narrative of the business. Yeah. Because it makes it personal, it makes it relatable, it, again, sparks up the empathy. So in my experience, and what I can often see is that a leader, a person will know the story I want to tell and know the narrative I want to create for this team, this change project, whatever it happens to be. But they will miss that connection to, well, why is it you're telling us this? Why do you actually care about this change?
So putting yourself in the story. Yeah. I think also one of the things I found helpful as a storyteller is to embrace the surreal, embrace plot changes or character switches. One of the storytelling workshops I used to run took me all around the world, actually, and it used one of Aesop's fables. I don't know if you know those stories.
Which one?
Well, two men were walking in the woods, and a bear came running at them, and the first man shot up a tree, and the next man lay down on the ground and pretended to be dead, and the bear came over and just snuffled him and then went away. And then the man climbed down the tree, said to his friend, what did the bear say when he was, speaking to you? And he said, he told me, never go on a voyage with a friend who leaves you at the first sign of danger. Yeah, I like that. But what I learned when we were doing this workshop was that you could switch the story and tell it from the perspective of the bear. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the story from the perspective of the man who fell down. But we could also tell the story from the perspective of the bear. One day I was walking through a woods. Two seemingly similar animals responded to the same rah in two completely different ways. I was curious about that. I tried to ask one of them why his kind did so many different things. He didn't say anything. He just smelt a bit of fear. That's why I left. You could also do it from the perspective of the military, but I think for work-based storytelling, understanding the perspective switch or character switch, which character you're going to tell the story from. Are you telling the story from you as the leader of a thing?
Or could you switch it to you be the most junior person?
Me as a team member here.
Cleaner.
Me as a team member here. This is what I need or I'm hoping for, or like you, I'm in the same situation. And you'll see these things going on here. So we use these, I think we use these quite a lot really, just to try and, instead of having policies and words to use story to switch the character or switch the narrative. I sometimes pretend that I'm like the most junior person, and that I think is another good character switch that says to people, this is a fairly flat culture and I have the same problems you have. Can you help me? There's the kind of structural skills.
They're things we can lean on, use.
Maybe the storyteller is not the right word. Maybe it's a story crafter. That'd be better.
I would absolutely agree with that.
Would you?
Yeah, I would, because you're shaving these bits off here, you're adding a bit on there, you're building this bit up a bit stronger. Each time you tell it, you iterate it a bit differently.
There's an art to it.
Absolutely. You're crafting it each time. And I think that back to that through whose eyes, I would sometimes talk about it when you're telling that story. That's how you can also multi-purpose a story. Because you can get it for different contexts, and you can actually say it's the same set of events, but actually if I see it from the project team's perspective, the deadline was much more critical than from my perspective. Or if I see it from the end client's perspective, that same set of events would look like this. Same story, through different eyes, and completely different.
Another example actually of that is our disagreement a story of clash of ideas, or is it a clash of egos? Yeah. And I use that a lot in my management process, because very often, and when facilitating, very often what seems to be a clash of ideas or the right thing to do is actually a clash of egos looking for a pecking order or who's really strongest or the boss. Yeah. So there's lots of depth. I wanted to ask you, while we've got you here, just one final one before we wrap up, Conky. Do you think, as an organizational storyteller, it matters if the stories are actually true? Does it matter if they're actually fiction, a well-worked yarn? Or do you think they need to be truthful, fully truthful, or based in truth?
If we come back to something that I said earlier, there's no right or wrong remit. This is where a story is, this is where a story isn't. Fiction is obviously a completely, is the most popular genre within storytelling in terms of viewership, all of that. However, in the business context, I think you're potentially on dangerous ground if it were found out down the road that what you had said was incorrect.
So from a credibility...
From a genuine authenticity point of view,
yeah.
I think it's at least got to be founded in truth. Now, the old anecdote, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. I think there is some freedom within that. Was it exactly that number of people in the room? Is that important? Was it exactly in the month of July of 2019? Is, the small details, I think you've probably got a bit of artistic license to say, am I telling this in the most effective way for this group?
Chris and I once got an upgrade and we didn't tell everyone that we paid for it. So when we came back, we said, oh, well, that was incredible. We got upgraded to business class. And they're like, wow, you
use a bit of influencing.
Yeah, a bit of influencing skills.
We didn't mention the money we paid.
Didn't mention a bit of cash.
Yeah. money is very influential.
Yeah.
But would you both be upset if I told you I didn't even walk through Chiswick Harrow this morning on the way here? Just took an Uber.
Yeah.
Came a different way.
Yeah,
I would have assumed that was the truth.
Yeah. Inauthentic, really.
Yeah. But this is the thing, why you're on dodgy ground.
Yeah, I agree.
If you're telling a team a whole set of inspiring stories, so at least founded in reality, if some of the details are nuanced, I think that's where you've probably got a bit of artistic license. The other thing is that it doesn't have to be about you. The story doesn't have to be personal. It can be something you've seen. But again, in terms of owning the message, owning the impact of it, because this is, if we come back to something mentioned earlier, one of the things that will change it from an anecdote to an effective story is the characters involved. Was there a change? Was there a shift? Was there, this is what I thought before, and this is what I realized was actually the truth after. This was my capability or awareness before, having gone through this situation. This was my capability or realization after. If
this was my quiff before, and then 10 or 15 years later, this is my quiff after.
That is the story of children and becoming grey. Yeah. But that's what changes it from just, I'm just telling a funny thing around the coffee machine. That actually you're telling a story of a learning, a change, a shift, a something. And if you can't own that or really describe it, you're probably not going to be as effective in telling it, which is where having it at least based in truth and reality allows you to actually really own that and say, this is what I learned.
Excellent.
Yeah. It reminded me, as we've been talking, of something I heard once, which is that interesting things happen to good storytellers.
Oh, Chris.
Which is what people say. But maybe it's actually just that the good storytellers, it sounds like a lot of interesting things happen to them. Maybe we can see some of those things if we keep our eyes open.
Let's keep our eyes open.
And to what John said earlier, it's exactly that. You want one tip to do, it's notice them. Notice them. It's activate your thing called the reticular activating system, and it's the thing that meant that you never used to see a red car, and then you bought a red car, and suddenly there's red cars everywhere. It's just because it became important to you. If you're not looking for stories, surprise, surprise, they don't happen to you.
You learn to notice them in a way.
You look for them,
suddenly they're everywhere.
They're everywhere.
Yeah, Fantastic. It's been a pleasure having you on the podcast, Andy. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure being here. I'll definitely go back and watch the other ones.
You've become part of the narrative of our podcast.
Even if you
you.
just subscribe,
Get the notifications,
comment below.
hit the bell.
You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about the kind of requests you get for clients, people wanting storytelling workshops?
Yeah, I mean, the requests we often get are from clients perhaps involved in a change program, or they're looking to try and make sure that their leaders are able to effectively tell stories that are going to bring a group of people along with them. We also get requests for running leadership-specific storytelling to just up the level of impact of leaders within organizations. And then sometimes we're running more specific storytelling sessions for, content creators, a marketing team, content creators at some of our clients who are actually wanting to make sure that the stories they're creating to put out there are as compelling as possible.
Brilliant.
Well, you are also a fundamental piece of the narrative of our organisation.
You're a main character, Andy.
Main character. We're very, very grateful to have you here.
It's only in the supporting cast, but I love being part of it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Jonna.
Thank you, Chris.
See you next time.
See you next
Thanks,
time.
guys.
So, Chris, Andy has left us.
Yeah, but what a fantastic guest.
He's really fun, isn't he?
Yeah, brilliant. And knows what he's talking about to do his story.
He knows what he's talking about. I was really interested. Obviously, he had a lot to contribute, and I was chipping in as well. What did you make of all that? You're a work person. You go to work, and you've got to try and think about how to motivate your team.
Yeah.
Talk to your clients, yourself.
Yeah.
You're in a story. What did you make of all that?
I'm interested in the stories, and I picked up a few things. I think I was surprised by how much we focused on the audience, how much Andy was talking about, thinking about the audience, thinking about the response that you want to get. I thought maybe we'd focus more on the craft of the communicator, the things you should do, the things you should say, the non-verbals. But actually, we focused on something we've come back to quite a lot on this podcast. What does the other person want? What do they need?
What do they need from this story? Yeah, I guess so. It's almost like making meaning. What meaning are they going to make of it?
Yeah.
It's not so much about you. And I think that's something he was also mentioning. You don't have to put yourself in the center of the story. You can share a good yarn, but it's about that audience, about what they need from it. I was thinking also, stories are free, aren't they? So we invest in so much in terms of employee engagement. We invest in
people,
offices, people,
salaries,
off-sites, travel, training, systems,
rewards, bonuses.
But for me, the question I always ask myself is, when you're going home on the tube at the end of the day, or you're hanging on to that strap, what's going on in your head? Yeah. And free stories, aren't they?
Free resource. Why not use them?
Resource, not cheap. Actually, it does take some sweat to put it together.
There's some effort, there's some craft, as we talked about.
Yeah. And it's interesting that Andy, he has travelled the world just helping organisations to improve their story communication. Yeah. Sounds like quite a good job.
I suppose those stories are a bit, in a sense, the diamond, what we need to chisel away at, maybe, polish, but that bit is free. Then the craft to actually make them truly valuable is what we have to do.
Yeah, that's blood, sweat and tears. Yeah. And he's a master craftsman. I guess the diamond is a good analogy. Stone, try to chip it, break it. In the right hands, you can turn what was just lying on the street into something that people would stick in a ring or a necklace and wear on a crown.
There we go. The crowning glory. Well, we should finish up our podcast. Jonna, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Time for some dash water.
Thanks for watching this video by Interactive Workshops. Give it a like down below and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next video. Click through to here or here to watch another video by Interactive Workshops.